Hello, and welcome to Coffee with Vivian and Sara. I'm Vivian Siskin,
And I'm Sarah McIntyre.
and we're here to talk to you and sip coffee and talk about all kinds of things stuttering. Today, we're going to be talking about role conflict, and we're going to get into some of that and how to resolve it. But first, important, let's talk about our coffee. Oh, my
Talk.
Paris cup. You see my Paris cup?
I like it. I was going to say, why don't you go first? I think I went first last time on the coffee
Yeah.
intro.
It says inside, this was given to me by a very close girlfriend. I often daydream that my life is just as it is now, only I have well behaved hair and I live in Paris.
That's really nice.
Bye. Yeah.
Mine's the same coffee cup as before. I am a creature of habit. We were chatting right before we hit record about my morning walk. That is the exact same loop. Well, same mug of coffee.
Same mug. Same mug. I probably won't bring this one back next week. Maybe I'll bring back another mug. We'll see. That might be my thing to do. I don't know. Yeah.
Maybe I'll step outside of my comfort zone next week and bring a new mug.
Well, today's topic this was Sarah's idea to talk about voluntary stuttering and self disclosure, but let's bring it into the context of role conflict, right, Sarah? So, what is role conflict? So, it's when there is incongruency between your authentic role as stutterer or person who stutters and a false role, like fluent person, or other false roles like funny person or ultra confident person. So, very often, false roles lead to fluency. We all know that. That's why people take on roles. But the problem is, if you take on the false role of fluent person, when your brain and your body wants to stutter, there's a lot of conflict there because you have these two roles that are in conflict, and there's a lot of reactivity with that stuttering. So, through arts, one of the things that we do is kind of resolve this role conflict through what we call role enactment. And that's enacting the role of a person who stutters or stutterer. And when you enact the role of a person who stutters, then that conflict is resolved. You have congruency. So there are two main ways, but there are many other ways too. But we're going to talk about two ways to reduce that role conflict, role enactment, two ways. One, voluntary stuttering, and the other one, self disclosure or advertising. So we're going to start off with self disclosure, advertising. And since it was Sarah's idea, I'm going to kick it off and ask you a question, Sarah. Okay.
Deal.
So, and I don't really know the answer to this, so I'm really interested in hearing your response. So, as someone with a covert profile, there must have been a period or a time or a moment where you did your first self disclosure and you conceived it as a self disclosure. In other words, you weren't outed by somebody, you decided to disclose. Do you have a moment like that?
Yeah, I remember the first time that I self-disclosed for sure. I don't know that I was quite ready yet. I think it was just part of the program of sort of this is when you're going to self-disclose and we're going to do this today. If there was ever someone who was the furthest thing from role congruency, I think in that moment I really very much was in terms of only enacting that role of a perceptually fluent speaker on the outside. And I went to extreme lengths in order to maintain that external role or image. And I remember being told about advertising or self-disclosure, the concept of telling someone aloud that you stutter and putting it out there, and debriefing on the ins and outs of the reasons why it could have utility for you and the listener, but mostly for you. And I remember really being in this state of shock of like, I don't think so. I can see it and I can understand how that could be helpful for some people, but not me, not me. And, it was and in a way, I feel like I'm thankful for the nudge and or more than a nudge, it was like a thrust. Here you go, you're doing this. But I also was in such fight or flight, like out of body, out of mind experience there that in an ideal world, I maybe would have planted more seeds. But I remember, and I told the story last time we talked about he hearing my friend Roisin in the elevator talking openly and stuttering and literally like peeling myself a little bit harder against the elevator wall. Mixture of discomfort, mixture of all the things, uncertainty that I could ever do that. And it came time to do some disclosure practice, and we were making phone calls. And I remember sitting back and not diving in like maybe some others were. And I again, Roisin was there for me. I think many of us have some people that we go through the journey of change with, and they become our people. And Roisin like kind of checked in with me, and she was like, "All right, I'm going to help you. Like, let's." And we opened up the phone book, and she said, "Why don't we call a florist? They're probably the nicest. Let's find a florist and let's call them." And my memory serves that she actually held the phone up to my ear, but that might have, I'm not sure that that's absolutely certain, but in my mind, I needed so much help that would felt like that was what was happening. And my physical response to stuttering, to shut it down, was because saying the word stutter was just, it was really long. I remember it was painful. And then I also had this feeling of relief after I got the word. I stutter out. Isn't it interesting? Like just recollecting that moment and putting myself in that emotional state has me more reactive. Anyway,
Yeah.
I digress.
Yeah.
But yes,
Well,
that was
it
my
was this
moment.
significant memory. Yeah.
Mhm,
Yeah. Yeah.
mhm.
I'm curious, did you feel you mentioned relief after saying the word, but was the experience one of relief? How did you process that experience?
I think I was in such a state of shock over the first few times that I disclosed that I'm not sure I felt the total relief. Yes, I can do this and this is going to be useful in my life just yet. But over time, like building myself up to doing it a little bit more and even disclosing or advertising in person and putting stuttering out there, um, it started to feel really relieving. It started to feel like I was like shedding a weight off of my back physically. And while I was still freaking out and like, under the water analogy I gave last time, like my legs were still moving and pretty solidly moving, but I could feel myself not carrying such a weight of needing to continue to always kind of act, which I feel like is what I was doing when I was acting as though I was someone who doesn't stutter.
Yeah. So I'm sitting here with my therapy hat on and put yours on for a second.
Okay.
Given your experience, I'm listening to your experience. I'm actually feeling the emotions that you felt at the time you were doing it. Um, do you feel like that is a good way to introduce people to self-disclosure? Or, my gut tells me that it has to be more of a decision that grows from their desire to um, let people know, their desire to put it out there, their desire to um, at some point um, show that part of them. I don't. What is your thinking in terms of, as you say, not really be kind of being pushed into it? Like, do you need to be ready? I guess that's the question I have.
Yeah. I think that in an ideal world, more seeds might have been planted to get me a little closer to readiness on my terms. And I think a lot of things can go into that clinically, talking about the pros and cons and weighing them, right? I know that you talk a lot about the scales tipping in terms of readiness there.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I also think that it's not for everybody. As it being a part of a therapy program, an essential part of a therapy program, I think it's only one of many, many ways that you can reduce role conflict. Um, I know people who have made it a very big part of their journey, and giving not only themselves permission to stutter, but sort of allowing the listener to understand stuttering in the way that the person who stutters wants to present it. In other words, this is my opportunity to present, we'll talk about the various types of advertising,
mhm,
but I think the way someone self disclose does influence the listener. It does a lot for the person.
mhm,
But there are many people who that is just not the way that they're going to go about reducing role conflict. They'd rather show stuttering.
mhm,
Yet many who advertise very, very easily will never show stuttering.
mhm,
So I thought that's an interesting conflict as well. That
mhm,
I find people that are either I love self disclosure, but I'm not going to show it, and there's other people I'm willing to show it, but I'm not going to self disclose.
mhm,
Two different forms of role enactment, so to speak. You know?
mhm. Yeah, I think there's individuality in that in terms of what feels right for the person, and then where are they in terms of readiness? Which feels closer to actually feeling like they can do it. It doesn't have to be an order of operations that's self-disclosure first and then showing overt stuttering. You know,
Yeah,
it's hard, and I think it's a conversation, and understanding for that person what it might look like, maybe talking through what they might say and how they might say it in the therapy session, and also hearing from other people's experiences too. But I don't it's not an absolute, I don't think. And there are people who prefer to go about that role congruency journey in just putting stuttering out there little by little.
yeah, yeah. I also find it really interesting, the people who, um, for them, self disclosure becomes another way of avoiding, or another way of it's another role, so to speak.
Mhm,
Um, it's I don't know if you've met people like this, but they'll talk about their stuttering um, in a way that prevents others from judging them right up front.
mhm,
So, oh, hi, I'm a person who stutters, or I'm a stutterer, and I'm an advocate for the people who stutter, and I'm very active in the stuttering community. Sort of like putting yourself out there before somebody can give you a pity look, or before somebody can judge you as something stereotypical.
mhm,
Um, and I find sometimes that hiding behind even that role, even the role of someone who self discloses in a healthy way, can sometimes turn into something that is preventing people from putting out their authentic self and
mhm,
allowing other people to judge them.
mhm,
What if you didn't have to give that whole talk about yourself? What if you just allowed people to see you stutter
mhm.
and didn't do the self disclosure? That could be scarier for some people, don't you think?
Yeah, me included. And there's a lot of nuance in what you're saying there because, and don't get me wrong, self-disclosure has played a huge role in my journey in terms of rectifying that desire to be seen as a fluent speaker, with living more as my authentic self as someone who stutters. And in a way, I relied on self-disclosure a lot for a while, and I still do. I think if I feel those like stuttering jitters or worries get me, like that, and I feel like I will ease them a little bit more by self-disclosing, and I can't tolerate just openly stuttering there, then I'll self-disclose. But ultimately what I need to do in a hypothetical and a real state in a realistic place is to not to go into situations where I want to do and not feel like I need to self-disclose because like you said it's a way of, I don't know, another sort of crutch in keeping myself safe from what I am worried that I might experience from the listener and also internally myself. So
Yeah,
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 it's
no,
a
I think
lot.
yeah, I love that, and it makes me think of, again, why do I always go back talk about creatures of habit? You know, going back to the intent, like what's the rationale that the person who stutters uses for self-disclosure? And I think that if they ask themselves, I'm advertising here in order to, and they're honest with themselves, they can figure out whether it's healthy or not for them in terms of
Mhm.
where they want to go in their goals of therapy.
Right.
Yeah. So if you still advertise or you still
Yeah.
self-disclose, what's your rationale in your head? Putting you
Yeah.
on the spot, Sarah.
That's a good question. I'm just trying to think of the most recent time that I did. Um, I I called my insurance company and they always ask for your member ID number. That's like letters and numbers, and there's like 12 characters, right? And it was like the third person I had been transferred to. Like, okay, here we go. And I was in a rush, to be honest. And I I I self-disclosed in a way that served the purpose of, listen, I know if I self-disclose here, I'm probably not going to stutter as much on the member ID number. And I've got places to go right now. I've got a session starting actually. So I'm going to self-disclose. Like, and I did it in a joking way, like, all right, listen, I stutter. So, I'm going to have to say this more than one time. All right. And something along that line. So the purpose there, I don't, even though I knew deep down it was a little bit because I know when I disclose, my reactivity is less, but in a short term sense. It's not like I am really forging ahead in that situation beyond needing the self disclosure, if that makes sense. I can tolerate showing stuttering there, and that's really ultimately what I need to do continually in order to reduce the reactivity there. But in that situation, my intention wasn't that deep at the same time.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, yeah. I'm in a hurry. Yeah. You're really in a hurry. I'm just
Right, right, sure. Why don't you therapyize me, please?
that extra 2 seconds would really
Mhm.
make a difference. Yeah. No, I
Sure.
think it's interesting. I think it's interesting for people to really think about what their goal is when they disclose. I mean, I disclose, things that are shameful to me or might be in a certain area, especially when I'm out and about with my son and he draws a lot of attention, my son with autism. um, and disclosing, I have to think about why I'm doing it. What's my motive here? Um,
Mhm.
and I'm just curious to know if you think about that when you self-disclose.
Mm.
Is it, I don't want to my is it my stuttering will interfere with communication here, or is it that, I don't know, um,
Mm.
or is it something that you don't think about anymore?
Yeah. I don't self-disclose that often
Yeah.
at this stage, but I think I will use it occasionally strategically for myself if a situation has sort of a kind of flashback to the past, negative situation that I find myself living in for a moment. And maybe there was a misconception related to stuttering that I maybe experienced and here and now have a worry that I might experience, and I'm still a little too deep in that flashback to jump right to, let me just put it on out there 100%. um like maybe this isn't super recent, but I remember job searching, and I remember self-disclosing strategically in a way to dispel the misconception that, stuttering was related to intellect or communicative effectiveness. And I had this feeling like they were going to lump stuttering and not a great communicator together unless I strategically self-disclosed in a way that dispelled that. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
I like the rationale of educating
Mhm,
your listener. I mean, I think that's a valid rationale.
mhm,
Just in terms of the theme of what we're talking about today, in terms of role conflict, I think one of the best rationales for self-disclosure would be to present as a person who stutters. And
mm,
that's one way of doing it because when you present as a person who stutters, it gets you off the track of trying to hide your stuttering, and
mhm,
you're already opened up the door that you are going to take on this role. And once you say you're taking on that role, you generally do, and
mhm,
then you're congruent. And
mhm,
like you said, very often when you have role congruency, yeah, you have less reactivity. Um,
mhm.
a, a byproduct, but not a goal. Um,
Right,
yeah, from
right.
this perspective, I think that the byproduct of increased comfort in your communication from self-disclosure, if people have it, some people don't, but if they do have it, I think that's a really honest, authentic byproduct
Mhm,
that you're sort of jumping the gun and putting yourself out there as a person who stutters before you can begin even like I'm going to go into this situation and be as fluent as I can, sort of like calling that insurance company and saying, let me see how fluently I can say these numbers and letters.
sure,
How
sure.
well that won't work out too well for most people. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's so simply put to when the purpose is to give myself permission to show stuttering. And I know that by doing that, I'm going to therefore more. Yeah.
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 That is really
Yeah.
succinctly put.
What's a really what are some principles of good self-disclosures from your perspective? I'll share mine too. We can both share some of our principles of good self-disclosures.
I think the first one that comes to mind would would be make it your own,
Oh,
to not feel like you
I like
need
that
to
one.
say it a certain way. That and I think that that's really important to explore first. Most clients are like, well, how should I self-disclose? How does it go? And I like to start having a conversation about, well, what would it look like for you, and to go from where their instinct is and scaffold it a little bit. But make it your own would be the first one on my list. How about you?
Well, my first one, I don't know how many we're going to go, but
Oh, sure.
I don't know how many are on our list. But let's do it one at a time until we have it.
Okay.
We've exhausted our list. My first one is make it positive.
Mhm,
That would be my first one. So the idea that you're not apologizing. You're 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 saying positive things about yourself, and your tone is positive. That would be my first one.
mhm. Yeah, my second one was going to be, it's not just what you say, but how you say it and
Yeah.
how you put it out there. I would even wager to say that could be more important in dispelling some misconceptions or stereotypes in the how you're communicating it in terms of your body language. Are you looking like it's something that's a shameful thing that you're sharing? Are you sort of deer in a headlight? I mean, it's better, of course, when you first start to just do it. It's not going to be everything. So let's preface it by that, of course. But yes, that would be my second one, kind of checking in with your body language and tone, and overlapping on yours a little there.
Yeah, yeah. So my second one would be not to use pathologizing language.
Mhm,
So I have a speech difference rather than a speech impediment, or I have a stuttering disorder. I wouldn't say that. I stutter.
mhm,
Just to take out the pathologizing language, so that again, it's allowing the other person to see it as a difference
mhm,
and rather than a disorder, and to keep the conversation and the interaction um, in terms of the power balance, pretty equal at that point. Try to keep that power balance equal. So that would be number two. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we have a
Yeah.
third?
My overlapping, I mean, we can stop numbering them because you're making me think of things now. But to piggyback over what you just said, I think using the word stuttering would be something that's important rather than kind of beating around the bush or describing it. I think like depathologizing that word or deawfulizing it, like Bill Murphy would say.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And your second one also made me think of tone, and I think I would use the word confidence. So
Mhm,
present your self-disclosure with confidence and assurance. Um,
mhm,
and I often demonstrate with my clients two ways to say the same words. Like you said, how you say it is really important. Like the same words. Hi, my name is Vivian. I stutter. Sometimes you'll hear some pauses, and that's my stuttering. Versus, hi, my name is Vivian. I stutter, and sometimes you'll hear some pauses, and that's my stuttering. So the difference, the
mhm,
first one I was sort of holding back in terms of confidence, and the second one I had more confidence out there. I think that makes such a difference in
mhm,
your tone and the way it shows, even whether or not you're there yet in your journey, it shows that it's something about you that you're not ashamed of, even if
mhm.
you are.
Right. Yeah, there can be this, you can choose to act or share in a certain way, but you don't have to feel that way yet. That I think that comes through continued action over time. You sort of try on the shirt, so to speak, or article of clothing, and you get more comfortable wearing it. So I think that in discussions about self-disclosure and our affect about it, it's sort of like owning that affect and know that the feeling shift is going to come along.
Yeah, yeah, I agree 100% on that. Do you have any pet peeves on like bad advertisements?
Hmm. Peeves. Well, you know, I I think when in doubt, keeping it simple is sufficient. And I don't know if this is a pet peeve, but I think maybe giving too much intel for the circumstance or too much kind of word vomiting, so to speak, that isn't needed, I think can potentially work to your disadvantage in terms of you want to put this out there so that other people, it's like a non-thought to them because you mentioned it and then you did so in a way that kind of negated a lot of the misconceptions that they might have had or what ifs. And so then if we go down the rabbit hole of all the things, I think that might be one.
Yeah. And actually, last Saturday morning in group, somebody rehearsed their advertisement. And that's the very advice I gave. I said, does it really need to be that long? You could really just be quicker and get through it and make it just matter of fact.
Mhm.
Um, but the reason I asked you about the pet peeves, because I do have a couple of pet peeves.
Yeah, start, and then I'm sure they'll come to me as you share.
Yeah. So when people advertise, and then even though they're not using any negative language and it's not a negative advertisement, they invite their listener to think something negative. So, for example, I say, don't make that invitation. You don't need to. Sort of like, well, I stutter, and you hear some pauses. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. Like, what would they have questions about? You're inviting them to have questions about it.
Mhm,
Or if you don't understand something I say, just ask me to repeat it.
mhm,
Well, wouldn't people do that anyway in conversation? Yeah. So those invitations for negative thinking around stuttering is also one of my
mhm.
one of my pet peeves that I
Yeah.
get
No,
rid
I
of.
agree with those. I really do. And I could think of maybe some circumstances that someone might say that anyway in a presentation, and that maybe they can just separate that from the disclosure. But you're right, like we want to do as much as we can to change the potential misunderstandings that people might associate in their brains with stuttering. Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I think for me it might be when it is kind of presented as a script, maybe. I mean, this is a really potentially vulnerable experience for someone to go through at this early stage, or to utilize. And I think when I think presenting a script and making it feel like they need to say something a certain way kind of gets me a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there a time when you should stop advertising? What do you think?
It's a really good question. Actually, one I recently had with a client, and kind of reflected on my own journey simultaneously after the session a bit, because there is so much utility in self-disclosure, and so I don't want to come across like I am talking about it in a negative sense per se, but there is a point in time in terms of the utility curve that I am not going to rectify that role conflict or congruency there for myself until I deal with going into situations and not disclosing, so that I'm keeping myself away from what I ultimately don't want to experience. And I don't, and stuttering is something I do. I don't feel like it's who I am. And I that's how I personally look at it. And I don't want to in perpetuity be defined by putting myself out there, especially at the very beginning, in that way. I needed to do that, and probably in some areas still need to, in order to get myself to readiness, to feel like I am at the point to take on the discomfort and the risks that are likely to ensue, and to tolerate that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like your response on that. I think for me, if I were to advise somebody, for me it's um, stop disclosing when um, the consequences have nothing to do with it. In other words, if when you are at the point where you are 100% allowing other people to think what they think, and you are 100% allowing yourself to feel what you feel, and you're open to those feelings, and you're also open to the listener's thoughts, whatever they might be, and allow them to be there. There's no need to try to control either one of those. And so I think, sort of in the later stages of therapy, when we're sort of letting go of control, one of the things you can let go of is the self disclosure, unless at some point you want to talk about stuttering. That role comes to the fore. So I think as you move through the journey, um, the role, that when you become role congruent and you're out there as a stutterer, when you stutter and when you want to talk about stuttering, but the role kind of goes in the background with all the other roles you have in life. People have many, many roles in life, and they don't always come to the fore unless somebody wants to talk about that. Oh, do you have any children? Yeah, let me talk about my role as a mom. Um, or somebody's talking about, religion or holidays, or do you celebrate Christmas? And I say, oh, I don't celebrate Christmas. I talk about my Judaism or something, and my relationship to religion, whatever it might be. That comes to the fore at any one moment. And I think the role of stutterer can move in and out like that. So you meet somebody who stutters, and you get to talking about stuttering. Yeah, that role is going to come out, and you're going to be talking about it. Um, so I think that when you get to the point where you're allowing yourself to invite listeners to think what they think, and inviting yourself to embrace your feelings, whatever they might be, the maybe that self disclosure is not helping you anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
It's almost like when you get to the point where all of all of the external reactions that you had been keeping yourself safe from for a while, that you are now maybe proactively putting yourself into opportunities to experience. When you no longer take that as a hit to your sense of self, but you can actually deflect it and kind of look at it from like a third party perspective and think, oh, likely it's because they didn't know that that was stuttering right away. They were acclimating, or that's on them, not on me.
Mm-hmm.
I think when it's no longer a, a kind of getting inside, I think that might be the point of readiness in maybe relying on it less if one is relying on it strongly.
Yeah, yeah, good point. Should we switch now to
Let's do it.
a different way of resolving role conflict? What do you think? Yeah,
Good idea.
yeah. So I'll do some voluntary stuttering because I love to do some voluntary stuttering. I actually go out as a person who doesn't stutter, and I voluntary stutter in a lot of situations. I don't know if you know that about me. I also
No.
do a lot of struggle stuttering out and about just for fun, to see listeners' reactions. Sometimes I do some paradoxical assignments and see if I can get someone to laugh at me or hang up on me. I do stuttering in elevators. Sometimes I struggle stutter in elevators. If somebody say, "Hey, those are cute shoes," I go, "Oh, thank you," and I talk about my shoes that way. So I do a lot of voluntary stuttering as a person who doesn't stutter. And the way I like to voluntary stutter is a slide word. Um, and I don't know, you can talk about your favorite ways of voluntary stuttering. Um, we used to talk about either the bloodstein bounce. So there was the bloodstein bounce or the slide word. And I just remember Joshian liking the slide word better. And so I took that on. And there
Mm-hmm.
are a lot of reasons for it too. How about you?
Yeah. I don't know if I have a certain way per se of voluntary stuttering. I think I try intentionally to mix it up as best as I can, and for reasons maybe we'll get into. Um, yeah, I think it's a mix, but I love that you go out there and you not just pseudo stutter, but struggle pseudo stutter. I think that's so critical, and I do want to talk about that too.
Yeah. What do you want to know? Tell you about some of my assignments.
Yeah, well, first, what's your reasoning there? Why do you
Yeah.
do that?
I'm curious. You know how we talked about curiosity, and I would never ask my clients to sort of devise an assignment for themselves of something that I haven't tried. It's sort of like I wouldn't want to here try this food that I haven't tasted and I just cooked it. So I do want to know what that's like. I am complete. I know 100% that I'm not experiencing it the same way they do. I'm experiencing it the way I do. I'm looking. I know how to look like I've lost control, even though I haven't. So I'll lose eye contact and struggle a bit.
It's pretty
Um,
good.
Thank you. Um, I've had good teachers. I've had lots and lots of clients who have taught me how to voluntary stutter, and that's the best way to learn. And I want to see the difference between of listener reactions. I want to actually see to myself that I can stutter the same way to two different people, and I'll get two completely different reactions, just like people who stutter do. I'm not doing it to feel what it's like to stutter. I'm because that's not my source of shame. I can go out and reveal my own source of shame, and that'll do it for me. I have work to do. Um, but I want to see I look at things like if I stutter longer, will that encourage people to fill in for me? If I have a silent block, will that encourage people to fill in more than if I repeat? If I change words around, will people give me a funny look? So I'm really experimenting. I also um, done demonstrations with clients just in just they don't have to do anything. They just watch me,
Mhm,
and my assignment is to get somebody to hang up on me.
mhm,
So if I don't struggle, if I don't i- if I don't struggle when I'm on the phone um with that person, I do a lot of struggling with escape behaviors and block all kinds of things. People are not going to hang up on me. Um, they hang up when they're silent, so I do a really long silent block to see if I can get them to hang up. And sometimes they'll say, "Hello, hello, are you there?" And I continue to go uh, 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 to see if they're waiting. So for me, it's very easy to do. And I know a lot of people listening might say, "Oh my goodness, I would never be able to do that." And I want to emphasize that it's easy for me because it's not my source of shame. It's a complete role play for me. And so I don't want to take credit for anything great because it's easy. It's like somebody else who would be enacting my area of shame. It would be easy for them to do whatever behavior that was. So it's not really hard. It's just more of a curiosity from my
mm,
perspective, and also um, experimenting with ways to voluntary stuttering and to stutter and what the rationale would be.
mhm.
Because there are times in therapy where some of my clients will give themselves the assignment to struggle stutter rather than just to voluntary stutter.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's neat that you do that, and also really helpful from a student clinician training perspective, I think, to understand the purpose and the intentions potentially behind, there's probably a lesser desensitization process, but still desensitization process for them, yeah, assuming they don't stutter. But there is utility in it for clinicians.
Yeah. And even if they never understand what it's like to stutter, because they won't, the only person who would understand what it's like to stutter is someone who does. Getting a reaction from somebody, positive, negative, and talking in a way that you normally don't talk, um, there's benefit to be able to experience that reaction in a moment of communication
Mhm,
and to have, for example, communicative failure when you're not used to having communicative failure is a good experience. What does communicative failure feel like? Even if it's not stuttering, even if you're not losing control, even if it's
mhm,
all voluntary and you have control.
mhm,
I think I love we can get into the whole thing about students not wanting to do that these days, but um, yeah, I think there's a lot of value for clinicians to go out and to do this as part of their work if they work with people who stutter. I think it's
mhm.
huge value.
Yeah, yeah. But just to reiterate, I know you said this, but just another reiteration, not to claim to experience what it is that experience is like. And I think when the assignment is positioned with that intention, then it's missing the mark, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. And I think also that there's a lot of fear in doing it. When you talk to the students about what their fears are, they're very open about it. They're afraid they're going to do it wrong. They're afraid that they're going to offend somebody. They're feeling like they're appropriating somebody else's disability. There's lots and lots of reasons why they don't want to do it, and they're all valid for those people. And I think that if you work with people who stutter, you have to be able to stutter. You have to model, demonstrate, show people what they're doing. I think I can't even teach without demonstrating stuttering. So if I haven't had a lot of opportunities to stutter in a whole lot of different ways, I wouldn't be able to do that with my clients. It's so important. I mean, if you've never tried to stutter, it's really hard to work with somebody who stutters and you're trying to show them that it's not if you stutter, it's how you stutter. And if you don't know a lot of ways to stutter, you can't even demonstrate that. If I want someone to get sound in their blocks, I'm going to have to be able to show them that the other way of doing that would be sound in blocks.
Mhm.
And if I can't demonstrate the difference between a silent block and getting sound in a block comfortably, then
Mhm.
um, that's going to be a little less helpful in therapy, I think.
Mhm. Yeah. I kind of like that we started with voluntary stuttering from a non-stuttering perspective in terms of clinician utility and experience.
Yeah.
I usually gets like the small abbreviated version at the end. That was nice.
Well, it's got half my perspective here. It's got to be,
Mhm.
half the perspective. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the biggest controversy in voluntary stuttering is when to use it and why to use it.
Mhm.
You feel the same thing?
I feel the same way. In a way, I mean, there's so many potential whys or benefits, right? Depending on where someone is in their journey. And I think as long as we're clear with that why and it makes sense in relation to moving in the direction that they will want to go in enacting that role of someone who stutters, and then eventually enacting the role as someone who authentically stutters as how they might authentically stutter.
Yeah.
I think of it as like a stepping stone in terms of why and intentionality.
Yeah. Intentionality is like 100% for me. You know that.
Mhm.
Um, and I think the biggest problem, we start with the problems because,
Fine, why not?
yeah, start with the problem. Let's start with there's a lot of problems because,
Get right into it.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there are so many good things about voluntary stuttering, and I love voluntary stuttering. People sometimes think, oh, Vivian, you don't like voluntary stuttering anymore. No, I love voluntary stuttering. Why are you using it? Is my big question. And I
Mhm.
think that the observation that people get when they start using it because very often a clinician or they will realize on their own that when they begin to voluntary stutter, they begin to quote desensitize to their own stuttering and they begin to hear it and they'll allow it to be there. And that's a perfect rationale in terms of words. Doesn't work that way. And I think that um, that it doesn't really desensitize because it's controlled. And so I think that from my perspective, again, this is my perspective, it delays the real desensitization, which occurs when you allow yourself to lose control during the moment of stuttering. And that's really important to me,
Mhm.
my clients, is that we begin to um, if you're any to get used to the notion that going into the moment of stuttering is going to be a moment of loss of control.
Mhm.
And when you start controlling it with a voluntary stuttering, then you're suppressing one more thing. You're suppressing the loss of control.
Mhm.
So that worries me. Um, and I think that when people start using it that way, they learn very quickly that voluntary stuttering leads to fluency. It
Mhm.
does. It's a
Mhm.
fluency enhancing kind of behavior. And so everybody who's listening now, hey, you want to be, stuttering leads to fluency and fluency leads to stuttering. We have those waves.
Mhm.
And the more you voluntary stutter, the less real stuttering you're going to have in any one particular moment. And not that I'm completely against that. In fact, I offer my clients the option of, you have a big talk coming up. You don't want to show too much stuttering. Hey, do a bath of stuttering before you go into the lecture hall.
Mhm.
stutter to everybody, voluntary stutter to everybody you see all morning long. All that voluntary stuttering is going to make you a little more fluent. It's not a therapy technique. It's sort of, it's doing an adjustment for that particular moment in time where you want to have more fluency. And I appreciate the honesty in that. And I think that as a clinician, I am completely on board with making these choices and not being a hero during a big presentation when it's the highest thing on your fear hierarchy. But when people realize that they voluntary stutter and it leads to fluency, what I've observed happen is people voluntary stutter and then they do it as an assignment and then they don't do it. And then when they start to struggle, this is what they say in their back of their head, I need to voluntary stutter. And if a little birdie would to say, why? They would say, because it leads to fluency.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the danger from my perspective of therapy, which is stutter affirming, that if you're using voluntary stuttering because it gives you, quote, more fluency, then you're continuing to suppress your
Mm-hmm.
role, you're suppressing stuttering, you're continuing to reinforce that kind of concealment, but this time with voluntary stuttering, a form of controlled stuttering.
Mm-hmm. Or it is a type of stuttering that like appears more attractive potentially, and so it's a preferred presentation. And maybe there's some utility in a covert journey and very initially in just putting any disfluency out there into the world. Maybe it's just too much just yet to show like the big old ugly stutter that they're keeping the beach ball underwater with. But pretty quickly, I think the realization is, well, I'm still gravitating towards how that feels and looks. And I'm starting to use it as a means to blip over a real stutter or to not fully show my real stuttering. And in a way, it's still it's still that presentation of self challenge where you're ultimately not going to get further along in that role congruency until we actually deal with what it is that we're actually worried about putting out there. And it's not going to be pretty. In fact, it won't be for a bit. But I think also voluntary stuttering can become part of our pattern in a way too, when it is relied upon as a means of potentially getting out of a moment of stuttering or kind of pulling out or escaping. It can perpetuate that retrialing as well.
Absolutely. And I would say that for several of my clients who have a retrialing pattern, it's clear that it was begun with voluntary stuttering that was done in a bounce format.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's become sort of like an easy way to enter into the moment of stuttering.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, the fear is satisfied that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I love the notion of using voluntary stuttering to satisfy fear. That's a Sheehan thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just thought of that right now when I use the word satisfy. He always used to say, because people would say, well, how long should you voluntary stutter? In other words, should it be, I voluntary stutter like that? Or is it I voluntary stutter like that? And I sprinkle them in. Like, how should you voluntary stutter? And she used to say, you should voluntary stutter long enough to satisfy the fear. And so that meant as long as you're real stutters from his perspective. I always thought it was an interesting idea that sort of gauge it on, like voluntary stuttering sort of satisfies fear. You're
I
doing the
love
thing you fear the most. Yeah.
I love that. It also opens up the door to that threshold of fear and what that constitutes for that person right then and there to evolve and change too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think is the most helpful intention or means of voluntary stuttering?
Thank you for that question because you know the answer to it. Um,
Well, I
I
didn't want you to be the only one asking questions.
um, so my favorite rationale is to show stuttering when you don't have to. In other words, to show yourself as a person who stutters when you don't have to. In other words, when you can be fluent, everybody who can establish some fluency, they want to run with it. Here I am, I've got some fluency, just like grab it and run with it.
Mhm,
And then what happens is the person uses up their safety margin. Again, these are some Sheehan ideas. You drain out your safety margin if you run with fluency. But imagine giving up fluency. I don't know if that, I mean,
mhm,
what person who stutters would want to give up their fluency, right?
mhm,
It's so
mhm,
cherished. But you give up fluency by voluntary stuttering and you acknowledge that you don't value it so much and that you can value disfluency and therefore you enact that role. And so that's what it is. It's voluntary stuttering when you don't have to stutter, showing yourself as a person who stutters. It's an identity assignment, not a
mhm,
desensitization assignment.
mhm.
That's
Yep.
my favorite rationale. Not to say that other rationales are not valid,
Mhm.
because I
Sure.
think other rationales are very valid. You have to know why you're doing it. And
Mhm,
if, like you said, it's so terrifying to have any disfluency, it may be for that person doing a little voluntary stuttering can sort of break the ice. Um, I almost think, though, that the way I would love that person to break the ice, though, is to say the word instead of substituting it
mhm.
and allow the chips to fall where they may on that one word.
Yep.
Um, and that can be terrifying for people.
Mm.
And so there may be a need to voluntary stutter on it ahead of time. But anyway, that's my favorite rationale.
Yeah, me too. Me
Oh,
too. And I'm even thinking of a client, a middle schooler, and you know, we were talking just a little bit, conceptually about voluntary stuttering, and came back the next week, and he was like, I actually tried that. I was like, oh, okay. We're just kind of talking it through about the concept of even doing something that seems backwards, just conceptually. And it was interesting. Even then, he had the tendency of doing the sorting hat, the good versus the bad stuttering. And you know, I don't I don't know how beneficial, even as a concept to explore, because the chips didn't fall where they could have, because that now we're still value judging. But it was telling, and it was an interesting conversation too, to explore the why there.
yeah, yeah. Do you ever, I don't know, I'm not sure if you think this way, but every once in a while, I think that if people, some people tell me, I love voluntary stuttering. Okay. Take it for face value. Why do you love it? I want to know why they like it. Would you like your other stuttering as much? You know what I mean? Um, because like the good and the bad kind of thing. Um, and I think that if people really love voluntary stuttering, and this is the cynic in me, I was thinking it must be hiding either that loss of control or hiding real stuttering or hiding identity or hiding something or concealing something. Not all the time, but I always ask a follow-up question about why they like it so much. Because very often people who use voluntary stuttering to give up fluency, it, it's not like they like it. It's sort of like, oh yeah, I can affirm my identity that way, but I keep on forgetting to do it. But I'm going to make an assignment to voluntary stutter to give up that. And I think it's really helpful for people who are working on identity, especially people who have a lot of fluency capacity. Um, and I think the more value that voluntary stuttering has is for people who have greater fluency capacities.
Mhm.
So if you have a lot of over superficial stuttering in your pattern, voluntary stuttering is not going to be as helpful. And
Mhm.
it'll suppress that, and then you won't be able to work on that.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. I mean, I also think about like the longer term longevity of voluntary stuttering. If someone says I love it, for me, I think I was thinking about how I was speaking for so long that the concept of what the end result would be, like how am I supposed to live well with this, to still think about communication at that um, sort of conscious level. I want to be more automatic and spontaneous and not think about it, right? And so in a way to that chip might fall in its place too once you explore that piece of, well, if you're doing it all the time, that's really sort of getting in the way, I bet, of being more automatic and being finally free of thinking about how I'm talking so much.
yeah. And what could be the answer if you ask somebody who's doing it all the time why they're doing it? What could be the answer?
Hmm. I think, like you have said, and and as a mechanism of control, as a mechanism of suppression, ultimately, of but maybe even part of their habitual response now at this point, it's just ha 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 how they respond to that moment, and yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It could be a learned response, but then it wouldn't be voluntary anymore, would it?
Mm, yeah,
We got to talk to somebody who does this.
yeah. I think ultimately your initial explanation most likely related to suppression and not wanting the true authentic big old stutter to come out.
Preventative, right?
Preventative,
Preventative.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. If I voluntary stutter here, then the stutter I'm predicting or anticipating in 2 words
Uh,
might be minimized, or I might be able to scoot around it.
yeah. Like, where does that differ from a prep set? Ooh, another conversation.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
We can get into Van Riper strategies in another conversation. Oh my goodness, that would be.
We're keeping a running list.
Well, Sarah, we've been talking for a while here. Yeah.
I know we keep saying maybe we'll keep them kind of brief, and then it's hard to get, well, first we're just chatting over coffee, and I think you want to get into the nuances when you have the opportunity to, and that does take time.
Mhm. Absolutely. Today was a really joyful conversation. Two wonderful topics, and I loved getting your perspectives on them. And I loved also just talking about them. It was so fun for me.
Vice versa. Thank you for inviting me to chat.
Well, we're going to be doing it again. Anybody listening, let us know your topics. We'll take them on. We're having fun doing it, right?
It sounds great. Yes, for sure.
Okay. Take care.
Bye, everyone.